that he also paid Farage £1 million in November 2022. I have never said this publicly before, but now that we've discovered, this is the first time I've said this, Paul, but now that we've discovered £5 million went to Farage in 2024, I am obliged to disclose the £1 million, which I believe went to Farage in late 2022 as well. And that smacks to me of a deal. The 2019 general election was sewn up between Nigel Farage, Christopher Harborne, and Boris Johnson. And it was a monetary deal. The other fact I think people need to know is that Christopher Harborne, he can sue me if he thinks that I'm lying. Christopher Harborne tried to break electoral law by hiding his identity when making donations to the Brexit Party in 2019. Now, I have said a number of things just now to you, Paul, which would end with me being, which should end with me being on the end of legal action from Christopher Harborne and Nigel Farage, if what I've said is wrong. They will not sue me because what I'm telling you is the truth. And I wouldn't tell you if I didn't have the courage of my convictions. Okay, so what viewers may or may not know, I have touched on it in the past, is that one of the reasons Farage and I have not seen eye to eye has been money. And my first experience of Farage being in the pursuit of money rather than the pursuit of what's good for this country was August 2020, when Rupert Lowe, Robert Rowland, who's now sadly passed, and I took, at my cost, by the way, Rupert and Robert were also my guests, as was Farage. I took them out for supper, and the three of us tried to press Farage into coming back into political campaigning. He hadn't done anything since 31st January 2020, when we notionally left the EU. And the reason we wanted Farage back on the campaign trail was because we could see Boris Johnson was about to sign a really bad deal with the European Union in what became the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And Farage turned round to the three of us, and I remember Rupert Lowe laughing at the time. It was quite funny because Farage turned around to me and he said, "It's all very well for you, Ben. You want me to come back and, try and put pressure on Boris Johnson, but you were born with a silver spoon rammed up your ass. I need to make money." I mean, I was not born with a silver spoon rammed up my ass. I think I mostly had my father's boot rammed up my ass when I was a child. But it absolutely set an alarm bell ringing in my mind that this is a crucial moment for Brexit, a crucial moment to take back control of the country. And this guy's talking about money. He ain't talking about what's good for the country. And then the other balloon went up in early 2023 when I discovered that the guy who'd backed the Brexit Party, a chap called Christopher Harborne, who lives in Thailand, who's this guy who just gave Farage £5 million in 2024. Obviously, that hadn't happened then. Had donated £1 million to Boris Johnson. Now, Harborne had always told me that he wanted Brexit. He believed in Brexit. And it was an admirable thing that the Brexit Party was doing to fight for Brexit. And that's why he donated, I think he donated £14 million in total to the Brexit Party. Without Christopher Harborne, there was no Brexit Party. But you'll also remember, and viewers will remember, that suddenly in the general election of 2019, Farage stood down 317 Brexit Party candidates against the Tory party across the country. Every single Tory MP had no Brexit Party opposition. He killed the Brexit Party's prospects in that general election, and he ensured a Boris Johnson government in one move like that. And the argument that Farage made in 2019 was, if I don't do that, we might get Corbyn, there'll be a second referendum, and we might lose Brexit. And I bought that argument. But that argument failed to hold water when Farage refused to bring pressure on Boris Johnson to get a proper Brexit. He just left the battlefield at that point. We all knew the withdrawal agreement was crap. We all knew that Boris Johnson was hopeless at the whole thing. And Farage swanned off. And then I saw at the beginning part of 2023, the same Christopher Harborne give £1 million to Boris Johnson. And what Christopher Harborne used to say to me also in 2019, 2020 is Boris Johnson is biddable. He kept saying, Ben, Boris Johnson is biddable. And what I thought he meant when he said to me, Boris Johnson is biddable, is that you can make an argument to Boris Johnson and he will listen to you. Actually, I think he was much more literal than that. He was saying, I can buy off Boris Johnson.
Wow.
And he paid £1 million to Boris Johnson in November 2022, after Boris Johnson had screwed the country, after Boris Johnson had screwed up Brexit. And I have it on good authority that he also paid Farage £1 million in November 2022. I have never said this publicly before, but now that we've discovered, this is the first time I've said this, Paul, but now that we've discovered £5 million went to Farage in 2024, I am obliged to disclose the £1 million, which I believe went to Farage in late 2022 as well. And that smacks to me of a deal. The 2019 general election was sewn up between Nigel Farage, Christopher Harborne, and Boris Johnson. And it was a monetary deal. That's how I see it. And when Richard Tice said, please join Reform, I wrote to him on the 16th of March, and I said, I'm not going to join Reform. I initially declined, Paul, and I gave 4 or 5 reasons, all of them to do with Farage, and one of them was the relationship with Christopher Harborne, because I did not trust what was going on when I saw the £1 million go to Boris Johnson.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said to Richard Tice, and I said to Isabel Oakeshott, Richard Tice's partner at the time, and still Richard Tice's partner, if I have a whiff of Christopher Harborne being involved with Reform, I am out. I will not, you won't see me for dust, because I will not be in a party which is being bought. Wind the clock forward to 2024. Rishi Sunak called the election on a Wednesday afternoon. I think it was Wednesday, the 22nd or 23rd of May. The next morning, Farage said he's not standing. Do you remember? He came out and he said he's not standing.
Yeah.
The US election is more important.
Yeah, I remember.
That evening, and I was furious because he screwed our press conference that morning. And then that evening, he came out and said, I'm not standing because 6 weeks isn't enough to fight a general election. We won't do well. And then suddenly, 2 weeks later, he appoints himself leader and he's back on. And I had always thought, well, the reason he came back was suddenly he realized he could win Clacton, because we were polling 26% in Clacton. We were almost, Tony Mack was the candidate for the Reform Party, and we were going to win Clacton. And I thought he must have seen that. But now I'm 100% certain that the £5 million was given to Nigel Farage to come back and become an MP. Now, if this man threw the 2019 general election to the Tories because of money, and if he came back in 2024 because of money, and he's now been promoting Tether, which is Christopher Harborne's cryptocurrency company, Farage is always promoting Tether, always promoting cryptocurrency. We know Farage is bought and paid for by Christopher Harborne. And this is a fact. The other fact I think people need to know is that Christopher Harborne, he can sue me if he thinks that I'm lying. Christopher Harborne tried to break electoral law by hiding his identity when making donations to the Brexit Party in 2019. I have seen the text that he sent to an individual in trying to induce them to hide his identity. Again, I've never said this publicly before. I'm saying it now for the first time because we've seen the 5 million.
Yeah.
And so Farage offers no hope to anyone. If I had to look up what grifter means when I first saw the word grifter, we used to call it graft in the old days. I thought maybe graft somehow become grift.
Yeah.
It clearly has, but we used to call it graft. And if there is any grifter in British politics, it is Farage. He's a grifter. He left the battlefield when we were fighting for Brexit at crucial moments, and he's taken an extraordinary amount of money from an individual who doesn't even live in this country. He lives in Thailand. If this guy, Christopher Harborne, really cared about the UK, he would be here. Now, I have said a number of things just now to you, Paul, which would end with me being, which should end with me being on the end of legal action from Christopher Harborne and Nigel Farage if what I've said is wrong. They will not sue me because what I'm telling you is the truth. And I wouldn't tell you if I didn't have the courage of my convictions. So the challenge, therefore, for Rupert Lowe is even greater. It's even greater because if reform get in somehow, all you're going to get is more grift, more taking the knee to whatever the puppeteers are paying, and not doing what's right for this country. So Rupert Lowe needs to very quickly decide, am I going to be a pressure group for reform, in which case I think the country won't succeed? Or am I going to try and be Prime Minister of this country? And if he wants to be Prime Minister of this country, then he has a big, big task on his hand.